She told me grace was for everyone but acted like I kept running out. I tried to ignore the condescension behind her smiles until I found out what she did behind my back. And do you know what happened right after that? Before I share what happened next, hit subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're listening from. I didn't grow up in a perfect church, but I did grow up in one that felt safe. Old pews, musty hymnals, folding chairs for potlucks. That kind of safe. So when my husband and I moved to Cedarbrook, a small Midwest town with more churches than grocery stores, I searched for something that resembled that childhood feeling. A warm place where my faith didn't feel like performance. That's how we ended up at Grace Ridge Fellowship. And that's how I met Marla. Marla was the pastor's wife. Blonde highlights, flowy maxi skirts, always ready with a Bible verse, and a stare that lingered half a second too long when she smiled. The kind of woman who called every get-together a fellowship and every criticism a loving correction. At first, I admired her. She had a confidence I never really had, the kind that doesn't ask permission. She ran the women's group, oversaw charity drives, and hosted seasonal dinners that looked like they were ripped from Pinterest. She also led our marriage counseling. And that's where the cracks started showing. It began small. Passive-aggressive prayers in the middle of our sessions. Lord, help Melissa be less quick to speak and more quick to listen. Help her see how you've placed good leadership in her life, especially through her husband. I'd glance at Mike, my husband, expecting him to catch the awkwardness, but his face remained relaxed, almost pleased. I swallowed it, like I did with most things. Because if there's one thing Marla was good at, it was disguising control as concern. And if there's one thing I was good at, it was assuming I was the problem. At home, Mike started quoting her. Marla says we should try fasting from screens during arguments. Or, Marla mentioned how some women wound their husbands by second-guessing them. It didn't bother me at first. Maybe it was helpful. Maybe I had to talk over him too much. Maybe I needed to be more submissive. I even Googled articles with titles like Godly Wives and the Power of Silence. And then I bought a devotional Marla recommended. The one with delicate watercolor flowers on the cover and verses about obedience bookmarked in pink. But the silence didn't make things better. It just made things quieter. Stiller. Like a fog in our house that never lifted. Mike stayed late at church more often. Marla needs help with the women's event. Marla asked me to fix something in the guest room. Marla wanted advice on the church website. I didn't question it, not directly. That would have made me seem insecure. Unspiritual. Besides, if you can't trust your pastor's wife, who can you trust? But then came the gaslighting. I brought up how I felt increasingly left out of the church loop. Marla started scheduling meetings without me, even though I was still technically co-leading the outreach team. And when I asked her about it, she tilted her head and smiled that same cold smile. Well, honey, we just weren't sure if your heart was in the right place. I laughed, thinking she was joking. She wasn't. That night, I cried in the car in the church parking lot. The next morning, Marla sent me a text. Remember, sis, wounds from a friend can be trusted. Proverbs 27 verse 6. I stopped attending the women's group after that. Stopped posting scripture quotes. Stopped volunteering for Sunday nursery. Mike said I was backsliding. What he didn't say, not yet, was that Marla had started texting him outside of church hours. At first, about spiritual guidance. Then about her favorite bands. Then about a dream she had, where he was comforting her. He showed me the texts, laughing, saying it was nothing. That it was just Marla being Marla. I tried to believe him. I really did. Until the night he didn't come home. I paced the living room until 1:42 a.m. That's the moment the lock finally turned, and Mike walked in holding a fast food bag and wearing a shirt that wasn't his. I asked him where he'd been. He said Marla had a breakdown, and he didn't want to alarm me. He said she called him, sobbing about her marriage, her faith, her identity as a woman. He said he didn't do anything wrong, just prayed with her, just held her while she cried. Held her. And somehow I was supposed to thank him for his Christian charity. The next day, I told him I wanted space. He said space was what worldly people do when they don't want to face conviction. Then he told Marla. I know this because I received a text from her later that afternoon. Melissa, I know things are fragile right now. Please don't let Satan use your imagination against your husband. You are a woman of grace. Remember that.
Grace.
She used that word like it was hers to give. I started keeping a journal. Not the pretty, scripture-filled ones Marla handed out during retreats. A cheap, spiral-bound one from the Dollar General down the street. I wrote down every little thing I noticed. Mike's late-night phone calls. The faint scent of Marla's perfume on the passenger seat. The way he started saying things like Marla thinks before almost every opinion he shared. How he flinched when I asked if I could attend his Bible study. It wasn't paranoia. It was pattern. And slowly, that journal started becoming my lifeline. One afternoon, I went to drop off a casserole at the church office. It was the only thing I still volunteered for, the meal train for new moms and grieving families. The admin wasn't at her desk, so I walked in quietly. From Marla's office, I heard laughter. Then my name. Then silence. I stood there. I didn't move. I just listened. Marla said, "She's too emotional to lead anything, Mike." That's not an insult. It's just her wiring. You're the one with real spiritual discernment. Then I heard something I'll never unhear. Her giggle followed by his soft, "You're terrible." And the rustle of fabric. I didn't confront them.
Not then.
I couldn't even feel my legs as I left the building. Instead, I drove to the edge of town. Parked at a viewpoint we used to go to when we first moved here. When we still held hands. When church felt like a haven instead of a stage. I cried until my throat hurt. And then I went home, opened my laptop, and began searching. How to separate church from faith. How to heal from spiritual manipulation. Signs your pastor's wife is gaslighting you. The internet may not offer grace, but it offers clarity. I stopped attending church the next Sunday. No big declaration. No Instagram post about this season. Just absence. Mike didn't ask why. He just said, "Don't let bitterness turn you away from God." Which sounded a lot like what Marla had texted me. I started to wonder whose words I was really hearing when Mike spoke. Then came the women's brunch. Marla insisted I still come. "It'll be good for your heart," she said. I replied, "My heart's not the one with lipstick on someone else's husband." She laughed. Like I'd made a joke. Like I was still the emotional one.
But I went anyway.
I needed to see them together. Needed to feel it, really feel it, so I could stop doubting myself. The brunch was in her backyard. White tablecloths. Homemade scones. Worship music playing softly from her outdoor speakers. Everything looked perfect. Until I noticed Mike's jacket hanging on the back of her patio chair. And her hand resting on it like it belonged there. She spoke about forgiveness that morning. About women being too easily offended. About spiritual warfare dressed up as feminism. I excused myself early. But before I left, I walked past the guest room window. The curtains were open. And inside, I saw a second toothbrush on her sink.
Same color as Mike's.
That night, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just pulled out the journal and began a new list. Church bylaws. Counseling session recordings. Texts saved in the cloud. Screenshots emailed to myself. Witnesses who saw them together after hours. I didn't know what I was building. Not yet. But it would become the foundation of my quiet reckoning. I didn't think I'd become that woman. The one who collects digital evidence like breadcrumbs. But when grace is used as a weapon, truth becomes your only shield. I started small. Quiet. Forwarded emails from Marla with spiritual advice that read more like veiled threats. Logged the timestamps of Mike's overnight church duties. Recorded one counseling session from 6 months ago. The one where she said, "Sometimes women misinterpret male leadership as emotional absence. But that's not abandonment. That's structure." Structure. She had the audacity to frame isolation as God's order. Around that time, a friend from women's group reached out. Hannah. Soft-spoken, new to the church, recently divorced. She texted, "Hey, is it just me, or has Marla gotten weirdly personal during our 1:1s?" I asked what she meant. Hannah responded with a screenshot. It was a message from Marla, warning her against entertaining a Jezebel spirit after she posted a picture in jeans. Then another screenshot, showing Marla venting about my bitterness to someone else. But she'd accidentally sent it directly to Hannah. I stared at the screen, and then I asked Hannah to meet. Over black coffee and guarded smiles, Hannah and I compared notes. We were not the only ones. Another woman, Rachel, had once been the women's group co-lead. She stepped down suddenly last fall. I texted her. She answered in less than 5 minutes. She'd seen the same patterns. Marla isolating women, flattering their husbands, weaponizing scripture like a leash. She'd also seen Marla touching Mike's shoulder during church cleanup. Too familiar. Too comfortable. But she thought no one would believe her. Until now. We formed a thread. Just us 3 at first. Then 5. Then 9. Each woman with her own story. Her own journal. Her own receipts. Some had heard Marla twist confidential counseling information in public. Others had been pushed out of leadership roles after disagreeing with her vision. One had watched her husband withdraw from her entirely after late-night mentoring with Marla. None of us were perfect, but all of us had been silenced. And for the first time, we weren't alone. Mike still hadn't admitted anything. He'd grown colder, more formal. Started referring to our arguments as spiritual misalignments. At dinner, he prayed with his eyes open, like he was watching for a trap. He stopped kissing my forehead. One night, I asked him directly, "Did something happen between you and Marla?" He paused for a full 8 seconds. Then, "I'm not going to dignify that with an answer. You need to check your heart." Check your heart. A phrase pulled straight from her mouth. That night, I packed a small bag and stayed with Hannah. I told Mike I needed discernment space. I knew he'd recognize the Christianese and back off. While he was busy helping Marla prep for Easter, I was printing things. Emails, texts, calendar logs, meeting notes, a copy of the church's employee conduct policy. Then I made an appointment with the elders. They didn't want to hear it at first. Too messy. Too uncomfortable. Too close to home. But they listened. Because I wasn't alone. Because I brought a quiet army of receipts. Because I looked them in the eye and asked, "If this was your daughter, would you call it gossip, or would you call it a warning?" 2 weeks later, Marla was asked to step down from the women's ministry. The church bulletin said she needed a sabbatical for spiritual reflection. Mike was livid. Said I'd embarrassed him. Said I'd humiliated the church. He never once said I was wrong. He moved out the following month. But not before asking, "Do you feel holier now?" I looked him dead in the eye and said, "No, but I feel clean." The house was quiet after that. Still. But this time not foggy. This time, the silence was mine. The morning after Mike left, I made pancakes. Real ones, with buttermilk and browned edges, not the protein kind he used to insist on. I sat by the window, syrup dripping, sun pooling across the kitchen tile. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a wife, or a church volunteer, or a problem to be fixed. I felt like a woman waking up. The texts came in waves. Some from church members, quiet support, nothing too public. Some from women I barely knew, who had their own Marla stories. And one from Marla herself. "I forgive you. I truly hope you find healing. Forgive me." As if I'd trespassed into her home, into her marriage. As if she hadn't slipped scripture between my ribs and called it love. I never replied.
But I did mail her something.
A manila envelope, no return address. Inside, a printed copy of the church's handbook on emotional boundaries in leadership roles. Page 7 highlighted. Spiritual authority must never be leveraged for personal attachment or intimacy. No note.
No signature.
Just scripture in policy form. Let her interpret that. I didn't go back to Grace Ridge. Didn't try to clear my name. Didn't take revenge in the dramatic, ruin her life kind of way. Instead, I began something smaller. I started a book club for women who were too emotional to lead. We met in backyards, coffee shops, parks. We talked about faith and fear and feminism and forgiveness, the real kind, Not the performative kind that starts with, "Bless your heart." One night, Rachel brought a new woman. She looked familiar. It took me a few minutes to realize she was Marla's former sister-in-law. Divorced years ago. She had left the church because she didn't feel safe. That night, she spoke more than I expected. Quietly, she said, "I always thought it was just me." I nodded. I wanted to say more about patterns, about silence, about the danger of a woman in power who calls herself humble. But instead, I just placed my hand over hers and let the silence hold us. Mike never asked to come back. He remarried a year later, not to Marla, but someone younger. Someone who, I noticed, deactivated her social media shortly after the honeymoon. Some stories repeat until someone breaks the rhythm. I decided that someone would be me. Marla now runs a blog about restoration after persecution. She speaks at conferences. She rarely mentions her former church. But I know this. Every time she looks out at a crowd of women, there's a chance one of us is sitting there. Not to sabotage. Not to expose. Just watching. Remembering. And knowing exactly who she is, beneath the scripture, beneath the smiles. People still ask if I believe in God. I tell them yes. But not the kind that lives in gossip chains or pastel devotionals. I believe in the God who sees journals written in the dark, who honors receipts kept in drawers, who whispers, "You're not crazy." I believe in the kind of grace that doesn't protect abusers. I believe in quiet exposure, not to shame, but to free. She called me a bad Christian. But God never did.